Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next edition of AmiSights. I'm Kassar, your host, and today is a special treat. In honor of this being our 200th podcast, which is pretty phenomenal, who would have dreamed it? I have a very special guest today. My brother, my elder brother, not necessarily my wiser brother, but my elder brother, Barak Kassar. And we thought it would be fascinating just to chat. Barak, why don't we start by telling us a little bit about what you do these days?
Interesting. Hi, Ami. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. Thank you for having me. Honestly, I'm your biggest fan. I listen all 200.
Right.
Here's what I do. I am also a small business owner. So in that case, I am actually very much a multi-funding. I'm in the multi-funding community. My wife and I are owners of a creative communications agency. We are about 8 or 9 people. We help technology, but increasingly biotechnology and life sciences companies tell their story. Like we help them figure out their story. We help them tell it via websites, video, social media, increasingly a lot of paid advertising, which is a great way for them to actually pinpoint target their audience and make sure that they see their message. So that's what we do. We've been doing it for a lot of years and it's mostly a lot of fun. Although I also in the last few years have been, as I'm getting kind of older and kind of like, why am I even on this planet? I've been doing a lot of fiction writing, which has been really nice for me. And so that's progressing along and it's really, really nice to have because, even though my job is a very creative job, it's always very much about, you know, the corporate message. Like that's the job. Like what's who's the audience? What do they need to hear in order to, you know, achieve the company's goals? And that's great. And I'm good at it and I like it. But it is really nice to have an outlet that is kind of has no goal, right? It's just about emotional expression. And creative expression. So that's been really nice for me. And I would love to see a time when my work kind of starts, you know, going down and the writing or, other creative pursuits go up, but can't do it quite yet all the way.
Awesome. I love it. So let's chat a little bit. I'm always interested in where entrepreneurship comes from. Were you born an entrepreneur or is it embedded in your culture where you grow up? Do people just accidentally become entrepreneurs? And while I'm not sure there's one answer to all of that, it is interesting to me that we have three brothers. There are three brothers. One of them probably wisely declined to be on this podcast.
Yeah.
But
He's the wisest of all three, the wise
yeah,
son.
wise son. But we all went on different entrepreneurial paths.
By the way, isn't
And
he upstairs, like where you are? Aren't you in his house? You should go get him. Get him to join for a minute or two.
no chance in hell he's going to come join this thing. So, why is it, do you think, there's any reason that all three of us chose entrepreneurial paths?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think we come from a line of entrepreneurs. So I don't know if anyone studied the genetics of it, but it's clearly in the nurture. I think we learned that from our dad mostly. I mean, our mom had a job. I mean, she was a teacher, and then she actually became an entrepreneur. Became a book publisher. So we learned it from her as well. But she first started out with a job. Every time we saw our dad with a job, he was never happy. I saw him happy when we first lived. We grew up in South Africa where he was an entrepreneur. He was a doctor who had his own practice, his own office, his own everything. And then they came to the U.S. and it took him a while to get there again because he had to take all his, you know, he had to basically be recertified to practice medicine in the U.S. And so he worked as a assistant professor at 2 universities and then worked for some other people before finally being ready to go out on his own. And he was pretty miserable, I'd say, until he was able to go out on his own again. So I think that we saw it. And I think he came from a line of people just working to get by. Like his dad also was a migrant going from Eastern Europe, right before World War II to South Africa, building up a business because I'm not sure in his case, like that's what he could do, you know. But maybe we just learned it. But maybe like for me, I think that what I might have picked up is that it's more emotionally comfortable for me to just not have a boss. Like I've got like 40 bosses, I've got 40 clients, but if one of them is weird, I just can like focus my energy on the other 39. And that's really important to me. And I don't know if that was, I don't know where I got that from, but that's truly my main motivation. That's like, I think my truest motivation for being entrepreneurial in the structure that I've done it. What do you think the answer is?
I mean, I just think a lot of it was from dad. And I also think, I mean, they say that, I mean, for everyone who doesn't know, I moved to the States when I was 8 in 1977, was 10. And my youngest brother, Yanni, I think was 2. And we came here. And I think they often say that second generation immigrants often take entrepreneurial roles. And I also think, in addition to dad, we around our kitchen table saw a lot of people coming to this country, and not all of them, but many of them taking on different entrepreneurial journeys. And we watched them sweat it out and get going. And I think, I think a lot of that sort of just immerses in ourselves. And I think now it's interesting. We're all entrepreneurs, but we've taken very different paths and we have very different risk profiles and risk tolerances and all that, and try to build very different things at different stages along the way. But I think that being a part of that immigrant culture also must have, I know it had a lot of impact on me, and I imagine it did on all of us.
I mean, yeah, we like, and it's not at all 100%, but like a lot of our top performing people on our creative network that we've hired and have had long term relationships with are immigrants or first or second generation, and not exclusively, but it's there's definitely there is something there, but of course there are a lot of people that are come as immigrants and aren't that way, and there are a lot of people that have been here many generations that also are that way. So it's
No,
hard to
it's
know.
not like
Yeah,
there's not one size fits all for any of this conversation. It is interesting to me that vis-a-vis this like second generation immigrant community, that um, the SBA just recently made a rule change. And I don't know if you know about this, Barak, but
yeah. I spent like 9 hours this morning just reading about the SBA rule change. So yeah, maybe I could tell you about it.
well, please, why don't you let me know?
SBA. Okay, yeah. What's the rule change?
It used to be that in order to get an SBA loan, your company had to be owned 51% by um, a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, which I think makes sense because, after all, it is a taxpayer-backed government guarantee program. In just 2 weeks ago, they changed the rule to say the company has to be 100% owned by U.S. citizens or permanent residents. There are many hundreds, if not thousands, of sort of immigrants who get a little bit of equity from home or abroad or whatever, whose loan applications got thrown into dust because they needed that extra equity to make their deal work. So it's just an interesting reflection on how, in this case, the immigrant community is getting hurt. I don't think for good reason.
I did not know about that, but it fits very much into the current ethos. Right? I mean, it's yeah. So you said citizen or permanent resident.
Correct. So if you have a green card, you're okay, permanent resident or citizen. But so anyway, it is what it is, and people will have to deal with it and adjust. Like, there are a lot of adjustments going on in this environment. But I do think so much of entrepreneurship does come from that immigrant community, and I think you should have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident to have access to an SBA loan. But I thought the 51% rule was actually pretty reasonable.
Well, there is this non-surprising, like I don't know if you want to call it a loophole or just a way that this particular administration is focusing, like, these golden ticket or golden visas where, I mean, a lot of countries have them, right? You can basically buy your way into residency or citizenship. So like, I think they are probably the mindset that if we can attract people of a certain, economic level, and they can kind of basically do whatever they like. But I think what it misses out on is just this incredible energy and vibrancy of people that, come without $1 million or $5 million to buy a golden visa, and who just creates such a ton of economic growth. But anyway, our country's definitely gone through like waves and waves of like immigration's okay, immigration's terrible, immigration's okay, immigration's terrible, and we're definitely in the let's let's just close down for a while. It's not. I find it very unpleasant, but anyway, this is the way it is right now.
Yeah. So Mark, let's go back. It's interesting to me. And, one of the things I write a lot about and I think a lot about is risk tolerance. And as entrepreneurs, we all have a very different risk tolerance, and that's okay. And there's no right answer or no wrong answer. But sometimes I wonder where that comes from, if that's also sort of embedded in where you come from, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good one because, like, to your point, I think you kind of said it earlier. Like, we all three have taken entrepreneurial paths, but all quite different, and all with, I'd say, not just different risk tolerances, but I'd say like just like there's different forms of intelligence, right? Like there's also different. Like, I feel like I'm super tolerant for certain kinds of risk, and I'm super intolerant for other kinds of risk. And like, I'm very tolerant for what you might call creative risk. Like, I'm okay getting something wrong, being, like, you know, saying something wrong, presenting something wrong, trying some idea wrong. Like, I'm also very okay with investing a ton of my time into something that might turn out to be like a terrible use of time, but I'll learn some stuff along the way. I always was always learning along the way, but I'm actually incredibly risk intolerant when it comes to capital. I just am. Like, I'm a little bit of a very careful about money. I mean, I'm not careful. I mean, my wife says I'm like not careful about like going out to eat lunch and stuff. Like, I mean, like, she has a little in our, monthly expenditures. She has I think she calls it Barak's food and sugar addiction is like the category in Quicken or whatever we don't, it's not Quicken anymore. It's now called Copilot. But so I'm a little bit wasteful there, but like when it comes to large expenditures or borrowing, but like, getting into the whole multi-funding thing, like I wouldn't want to borrow money for our company, and I wouldn't want to take equity investment for our company. I have had a startup in the past where I raised equity capital, and that was an interesting experience, which we can talk about if you like. But I feel like my investors were far more risk tolerant than I was, actually, and maybe to my and their loss in the end, actually. So I just think there's like this idea of risk tolerance, risk aversion, but it's not just. It's like, I mean, if I think about our brother Yanni, like I know that he took certain risks that were not necessarily economic. I would never have done, but like that really helped propel their company to like a great level of economic achievement. You take risks. You're much more financially risk tolerant than I am, and that's helped you in many ways. And so it's just super. It's just interesting, but it's not. I think it's not just economic risk or capital risks.
Right. And so do you think that part of the risk tolerance is also, and this is not right or wrong, when how risk tolerance might be different from that entrepreneurship, which is sort of embedded in you? Maybe risk tolerance, from our experience, is also influenced by when you get a spouse, and which is okay, right? So oftentimes we deal into situations where a spouse has a very different risk. Spouses have very different risk tolerances with each other.
Yeah, I
oftentimes.
mean, obviously, but and then and when you have to figure into that, like the sort of power dynamic in the couple, right? And the like, some people don't give a shit, and they just like power through, and some people really do give a shit, and I think it's like, and it's and finding that, I think if there's incongruence, it can really hamper situation, but also if there's incongruence, but the couple can like really, or can really like understand why, and like the power that they each bring, it can actually be incredibly, there can be incredible growth that happens, because even if so, I think that like there's the difference between the two, and but then there's also how that difference is negotiated and handled, and it can be very, I think it can be limiting, or growth, or grossing, not a word.
Is that a word? So check
It's
it in
definitely
chat.
not a word. It's definitely not a word.
Check it in chat GBT.
But your very wise listeners of this podcast will know exactly what it means.
But we also see that tension sometimes between business partners.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a case where two people start a business, and then at some point the business really needs a loan to grow, and one partner is willing to do it, and one partner is not willing to do it, or one partner's spouse is not willing to do
Right. Right. Right.
it. And one thing
Hey,
that
hey, wait,
doesn't,
just polyamory makes it way more complicated.
we also see, it's often from our experience tougher for a married female entrepreneur to convince the husband to put a loan on the house than it is for a husband to do, which is also sometimes can make it tougher for a
Yeah.
woman or a female entrepreneur. So um, I don't think we spend nearly enough time in the entrepreneurial culture talking about risk tolerance. We just celebrate fast growth or Inc. 5000 or quote unquote big success, but there are there are plenty of ways to have a great entrepreneurial journey and have a low risk tolerance.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. Like, I feel like I have absolutely had that. Like, I mean, my company's we've been around like 15 years now, and I say mine because it started out as mine, and then Kristen, like, I kept trying to get her to join me, and then she eventually did. So now it is ours. And but it's been around for a while, and it's definitely a low risk, and and therefore you might say low reward, but I would say very high reward endeavor. Like, we haven't borrowed money. I think once in our life, years ago, like we had some like client went wonky on us, and we were like, we needed to like have this. I don't think we got like we borrowed money in the sense that it took us a little long to pay our tax bill, But like, we've never borrowed money, and we don't have investors, and I guess really, really, really early on, we did in a sense borrow money, in the sense that we, like, our whole model is based on 1099 contractors. So like, if we did a project for someone, we would wait to get paid to pay them. And so in a sense, we were borrowing from them, but like, we've not done that in years, and we pay now it's actually the opposite. We sometimes loan to our clients, which is super irritating, but we do it because we want to pay our people immediately, because like, they are smaller businesses than we are, And so we're super risk, I guess, averse in that sense. And so it is, like, so you'd think that the reward, risk reward, the reward would be low, but the reward is amazing. Like, the reward is like just incredible freedom to, an incredible just happiness often, and like an ability to, for me, and this is the risk, I guess, aversion coming in, the ability to sleep at night, like, totally, and that's huge for me. So I don't know what am I? Am I a speed bumper? What am I in the Ami lexicon of, the
In my
growth
next,
dilemma?
maybe we should do this together, Brock. But in my next life, I want to start a sleep five. Have I ever told you my sleep 5000?
No, it sounds amazing. What is it?
It's sort of a parody on the Inc. 5000, but everyone who participates, you'd have to have like a minimum revenue threshold, and you'd agree to wear an OODA loop for a year, and then whoever has the highest scores at the end of the year actually wins the prize.
Oh, I love that. You should do that right now, and you should. That's a good idea. Yeah. I almost bought one the other day, and a friend of mine came to spend a weekend with me, and he had one. And but I don't know. I just did. I actually bought the first one, I think, off Kickstarter, but I haven't worn such a thing in a very, very long time. My only ring is this.
All right, Barak, we've been having a very deep and serious conversation, which is all good. Now, why don't you tell the listeners some really ridiculous stories about growing up with me as your brother?
That's right. So this is the 200th episode. It's like
I stumped him because there's
you
absolutely
did.
nothing.
Okay, well, let's get into a few things. It's more about later life than earlier life.
Right.
So Ami has a nickname in our family. We call him Drami because he's very Drami is in drama because he's very, I don't know, like but it turns out to actually be not a bad thing. Like in the moment, sometimes it's very irritating. Like you're like, you see the worst. You're like, oh God. And like I think I sometimes also just call you like you're the Fox News, not in the conservative sense, but in the like that the like the most sensationalist headline sense. But it turns out you're often quite right in the end. So
In the end,
in the end, so anyway, like but it is an interesting dynamic. But I'm trying to think of some stories growing up with you. I mean, I do remember, like, you were very entrepreneurial from the beginning. I mean, you and I had a little company called, what was it called? AutoCAD? Auto
it was the
something?
software we used, like CAD Brothers or something. I don't know. I don't think we ever got a client, but
No, we never got a client. We did have business cards, and I have it somewhere. I should have found it to hold up to the camera. But there's a little tiny room underneath the stairs in our parents' house, and we had a little desk in there with I don't know, I don't even what like it's a 286, the name of a computer, or a 186 or something like that. And we had some guy who had this software, and we were going to like help do design. We never, yeah, we got zero clients, but it was fun to try. What else? I mean, you're an interesting character to me. Like, I feel like you are so serious, but then like I think about, like, I've seen you have so much fun with your kids and like running around like our parents' house when your kids were little, and you would play like we'd play hide, and like you always have this like this willingness to play games, like to be like joyful in a way. And even though I think of you as a very serious person, I actually think you have a certain lightness that I strive to have, which is sort of weird and interesting.
here's a story about different risk tolerance that
Hmm.
maybe the listeners will get a good laugh out about. At one point, the house next to our parents' house was owned by an insurance company, and different executives would come in and out and live there. I don't know if you remember this, Barack, but
One, I don't remember this.
and we were teenagers or in high school, and there was a high school girl living there. And one night we were standing in our backyard talking to her out,
Yes, I remember this.
out of her window, and this man in a deep Southern voice saying, "What are you doing?" And I think talking about different risk tolerances, I ran so far and vomited on the corner. But you said, "Oh, we're just talking to your daughter, sir." And the guy said, "People have been shot for less."
I remember that. Yes, so that's a great illustrative point, right? Like, you're willing to borrow a lot of money, and like I would never, but like I'm willing to say that to that guy.
Maybe you have PTSD from that caused your low risk tolerance in other areas of your life. Maybe
Quite possible. Have you been going to say, are you married to some sort of like social worker type person, therapist?
she hasn't. She's been trying to fix me for a long time, but it hasn't worked.
It's going to be very, very difficult. Yeah, that is, I remember that. In fact, one of my short stories is literally about that very line between our house and the next house and the trees, because our dad wanted very much to cut those trees down so he could get a ocean view. I don't know if you remember that. I think he eventually succeeded in some level.
Yeah, we actually drove by there the other day, and they actually are finally cut down.
That road.
Or and now, very very cool.
So I want to know, like, how did you get into like doing multi-funding? How did you become, like, why do you do what you do?
I think my detour from entrepreneurship was about a decade in corporate America, which I don't regret. I think I learned a fortune. And while I'm sad for so many people that that company disappeared during the Great Recession. I think I never cried over that spilled milk, and I think it was my opportunity to go into my entrepreneurial or re-enter my entrepreneurial journey again. And I feel blessed that I found a company or a way to do that where I'm able to serve many and help many and find this unique mix of fulfilling my passion of helping entrepreneurs in a for-profit business where I can support my family. Most
And I remember our father always wondering, because he was a total in your face kind of guy. He was always wondering, like, what value is Ami bringing them? Do you remember this? What value is Ami bringing them? And but he was always such a worrier. He like worried about your company for the longest time, and in the end, your company's really taken off, and it's incredible. But he was like such, and you also provided a ton of value to that company as well. So he was kind of a worrier. He had risk tolerance for himself, but intolerance for others.
I think we were talking about him the other day on the anniversary of his death and loved him to death, but I think he never wanted us ever to face any disappointment. And so he would try block us from disappointment. But in that process, he would also, I think, that's not really realistic. Growing up, you're going to confront disappointment. I remember many times telling him, I'm going to try this or I'm going to try that. And he would say, what if it's not going to work? I go, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's how he learned, right?
So,
I mean, it's
so
also it's so interesting because like the thing that I remember him about, like I just remember like the thing that one of the main professional memories of him was he was an eye doctor, so he would refract. He would like say, "Is this better than this? Is this better than this? Is this better than this? Is this better than this?" It's a literally a trial and error, right? Like, but he was very opposed in many ways to trial and error for us in our lives, right? Like he wanted it to just like there was no finding the right answer, even though that's what he did daily, you know, 20 times a day for people to help them find the right level.
but
Anyway,
I do think I model a lot of our work at multifunding. I think after actually what he taught us about evaluating the different options and alternatives and the pros and cons, and then coming up with the right solution and helping someone think through different ways to cut the mustard. And then we just wrapped up one loan that went bad at first in the experience and it blew up and I jumped right in there. It was a tiny loan, but it didn't matter. But I worked furiously until we got the matter resolved. And that reminded me for dad when occasionally he would have a patient where something would go bad, he would work on that thing 24/7 until to try and make it as best as he could.
cool. All right.
Other questions for me, Barak?
Well, you have two wonderful children, a son and a daughter. They are at that interesting phase of life. They are just finished school. They're just starting their careers. How do you navigate that? How do you help them, but not like, suffocate them what's your plan? What's your methodology?
I don't think I have a plan. I'm trying hard not to suffocate them and to encourage them to go about on their own journeys and figure out their stuff. And um, I'm not sure I do it quite right all the time. It's actually one of my funnest stages of parenting because I think they come to us for more advice and input than they maybe did during college or for ideas or thoughts. But I'm super proud of both of them so far in their journeys and where they're going. I'm not sure either of them will ultimately be an entrepreneur. I don't know, but that's okay. And it's really good to watch.
Yeah, if they don't, what do you think will be the thing that might have flipped them? Because like it's, they'd be potentially fourth generation. If they were to be entrepreneurs, it'd be at least fourth generation entrepreneurs. And if they weren't, they would be,
I never really thought about it. I mean, I think their paths are going to take them where they take them. And I think one actually has a higher probability of being an entrepreneur than the other. But they're both very young and they're getting on their feet and they're figuring their stuff out and they're learning. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as they're learning in their environments where they're learning and they're building skills, I'm happy. Rock? Thank you so much for being on. I think it's been an interesting conversation. Where can our listeners, if they want to learn more about your agency, where can they find you?
They can go to the internet at www.
bkwpartners.com. Very cool. Or Barak Kassar on
Thank you.
LinkedIn. Barak, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me, honestly.